Then we can start with the refugee protection, international refugee protection. International refugee law is really complicated. And we're going to cover this roughly in this class because it's an introduction class. But I'll teach you the sources that you can refer to in the forthcoming years if you need to conduct any kind of research on refugees. That's a very popular topic, of course, because the number of the refugees around the world at the moment are more than the refugees in the aftermath of the Second World War. That's crazy, and instabilities are all around, therefore people are leaving their homes. Not only refugees, actually that's also the case for migrants. People try to find jobs in other countries. People fall in love in other countries and they follow their partners. What else? They seek their education in different countries. So people are traveling a lot as well. So number of migrants are also climbing. The first thing we have mentioned under human rights protection was that state is the main protector of human rights, all right? When the state is unable to protect your rights or when the state turns against you, then the individuals don't want to remain in that country anymore because they cannot find the protection. And what I'm saying is, of course, for those people that have one singular nationality, some people have double nationalities, double passports, double identities, then if one country is failing in protecting their rights, they still have a second home country. So they're not out of the umbrella. Well, state protection is always with you, even though you leave your country. When you leave your country for education, when you go for master's, for PhD, for internship, for a job, you know that your country is still, you still have your passport and your country of origin is still your protector. The thing is that if your country is attacked, if there's a war over there, if there's a civil war over there, that they cannot protect you anymore, then you start looking for other protections for your human rights. Then this refugee law story starts. The first thing is that Universal Declaration shares with us that all individuals have right to seek asylum. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is not a, please don't forget this. It's not a treaty, it's not a contract, it's not a binding paper. We have studied the Bill of Rights together. Bill of Rights is composed of three different materials. First one's Universal Declaration, and this is not a binding contract. The other two are Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, binding. Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, they're binding.
Can we classify it as a part of soft law?
Yes, actually true. And according to Universal Declaration, all individuals have right to seek asylum. But this doesn't mean that all states are obliged to provide asylum. This is not true. Protection is not given by all states, and states are not compelled to provide asylum to citizens of other countries. But individuals are allowed to seek asylum. Okay? Don't be confused. All human beings have right to seek it and to enjoy it when they find it. We have two important legal sources for international refugee protection. As you see there again, a product of the post-Second World War world. The first one is the 51 Refugee Convention. The other one is 67 Refugee Protocol. Both of them are important, and Turkey is a signatory party to both of them. What do you know about the status of Turkey in those papers? Yes, reservations, that's true. What do you mean by reservations, no?
Especially regional. Turkey only accepts asylum seekers from Europe, and it does not grant us refugee status to asylum seekers coming from other areas.
Completely correct. Well, those papers define what a refugee is, who a refugee is, who is eligible for seeking asylum, and what rights refugees can have. They're all designed in those papers. Turkey is a party to both of those papers. The thing is that Turkey has put limitations on the definition of a refugee. It is known as reservation. We have studied law of treaties in the very beginning of the semester, so you remember what a reservation is, do you? If there was a quiz, you could succeed. Öyle?
If you don't accept and withdraw from specific clauses of a treaty that doesn't violate the whole meaning of the treaty, then it's a reservation.
That's true. Either by a signature or by initials, paraf, the representative of the country signs the treaty and also puts initials next to a certain article saying that we agree with the treaty, but either we don't accept this very article or we accept this article with limitations. This is what Turkey has done. Turkey has limited the definition of refugee in those conventions, protocols. In Turkey's reservation, well, this is not the exact wording. Exact wording is somehow else. But roughly, those people coming from the eastern part of Turkey cannot become refugees in Turkey. Those coming from western part can become refugees in Turkey. Do you remember a very famous refugee coming from west in Turkey? Einstein, that's right, Albert Einstein. Well, that was before 51, of course. The protocol was not there, the convention was not there. But this is how it is actually. There are geographical limitations on the definition of a refugee. So at the moment, who are in Turkey? Syrians. So who are they? They're not refugees, they're asylum seekers. Actually, Turkey state has made different implementations for them, but I won't cover them in this class because this is too much of details for you. You don't need that much information for the exam. That's soon. Well, in those two conventions, we learn about who a refugee is, and we learn about their rights. And it is quite important to define what a refugee is and their rights. It is not only important for legal implementations, it's also covered by political and ethical importances. Yes?
What's the reason behind Turkey's reservation?
Actually, states are not compelled to share any kind of reasons for their decisions. But I can bring some explanations to that. Probably it was not solely a decision of Turkey, but also European states. Turkey is a bridge country in between Western and Eastern world. And this decision is probably discouraging people from the Eastern part coming to Turkey and proceeding as well. So probably that's the reason. But states are not compelled to give reasons for their reservations, never on their treaties. Well, legally, those definitions are important because refugeeship is a legal status, just like a citizenship. Therefore, definition of refugees are important. And those definitions are also important for ethical and political implementations. The political importance is that states are expected to cooperate in terms of refugee protection. So shared definitions help them to cooperate. You remember, we have studied terrorism in this class, and we have said that there is no international agreed definition of terror. Therefore, states cannot cooperate. When there are agreed definitions, then there is a basis, there is a common denominator for the entire cooperation. So this is the political importance. And ethical importance is that it also creates obligations and commitments for the states to protect refugees. Well, refugees, I mean, we're talking about human beings, all Homo sapiens, and we have said that human rights are for entire humankind. And if some of humans are out of their stately protection, then other states, when they're committed to protect their rights, then ethically we can meet at least the minimums for protection. At least a minimum protection can be provided for those people. Well, actually, we can visit all those conventions one by one, but that's not quite necessary. Instead, what we can mention is that they share the basic refugee definition. And that definition is that, let me see if I have. This is a complete wording of what a refugee is. And as a summary, what it is saying is that, first of all, there's someone running away from their home country because their home country is either unable or unwilling to protect their rights. The person is running away from persecution, not prosecution, persecution, from some kind of discrimination. And you are familiar with the basis of discrimination, right? The features that you bring by birth plus your ideological tendencies, ideological orientation. So there's a discrimination, state is not protecting you, either unable or unwilling, and therefore the person is forced to leave their own countries. This is how general refugee definition is done. The thing is that refugee is a status, it's a legal status. It is a status just like citizenship. So when you have the citizenship, you have the rights given to you by that country. You have the passport of that country. This is how it works. So with the refugeeship as well. Therefore, this is also a definition of an asylum seeker, this definition. Then we have to ask the question, who is an asylum seeker, who is a refugee, who is a migrant? Let's start with the migrant. Who's a migrant? Migrant, actually, the literature is also quite confusing in terms of those terminologies. And for migrants are immigrants, emigrants, and illegal immigrants and irregular immigrants. We don't need them for this class. What we need is just clarifying those three. First of all, migrant, it is used in two ways. One way is migrant, anyone who is outside their country for any reason is known as migrant. When we turn to legal standards, a migrant is a person who has left their country voluntarily. So when you're studying abroad, then you become a migrant. When you find a job abroad, you become a migrant. When you fall in love in France and your partner is in France, therefore you move next to her or him, you become a migrant. Okay? So migration is done on voluntary basis, first of all. Secondly, the migrant still enjoys the protection of their home country.
Is there a time requirement? Or because
No.
So tourists are also migrants?
Yes, that's true. Now we move to asylum seeker and refugee. Asylum seeker, how's that in Turkish? Sığınmacı. Refugee is? Mülteci, iltica arayan mülteci. Bulana mülteci diyoruz. Arayan, iltica arayan sığınmacı. So, there are asylum seekers and there are refugees. What is the difference? We have said that refugeeship is a legal status, just like citizenship. Asylum seeker is someone who is forced to leave their own country because they're running away from persecution. And they're not settled yet. Asylum seekers are not settled yet. Asylum seekers are looking for refuge. They don't have the refugee. The difference in between is the difference in their rights. Refugees living in Canada, for instance, they can enroll in universities, they can start a business, they can vote. Asylum seekers don't vote. So they have different rights. They cannot start a business. Perhaps they can find a job by someone else, but they cannot start their own business. So there are differences in terms of rights. All right? Yes.
If you become an asylum seeker or refugee, do you lose your initial citizenship to your home country?
You're running away from that. Imagine you're a homosexual living in Iran. Iranian police have spotted you with your partner and they have tortured you because you're homosexual. You're beaten in the police station. Then you run away from Iran because you know that you're spotted, they know you, and if they find you once again, you're going to face with some sanctions because of your sexuality and you don't want to have it. You have left Iran. Did you lose your citizenship?
No.
The thing is that if you go back, your human rights are going to be violated. That's it. Or there are numerous females running away from Africa because they're going to face female circumference. When a female runs away from Eritrea because she's going to face that circumference, does she lose her citizenship? The thing is that if she goes back, she's going to face some kind of torture. She doesn't want it. All those Syrians, there is a civil war within Syria, and the state cannot protect civilians anymore. Therefore, they don't want to remain there. They're going to die with the bombs, either of bombs of Daesh or whoever. They don't want to have it. Therefore, they're leaving their countries. Do they lose their identities? Citizenship? No. If they go back, they are going to be killed somehow. Therefore, they don't want to go back. So you know then the difference, okay? But if someone becomes a criminal, again, in Iran, and the person is going to come across with 20 years of enjailment, and the person runs away saying that Iran is going to imprison me because I have killed someone, then? Of course not. This person has to be given back. This person is not running away from persecution. This person is running away because this person is a criminal and does not want to be punished. So there are differences. Could you follow the difference then? Becoming a criminal, then you can be given back to your country. But if you are a refugee or asylum seeker, then you're running away. Salman Rushdie, for instance, who is he?
Writer of the Satanic Verses.
Satanic Verses. And what has happened to him?
Iran said he should be killed at sight.
Definitely. Then fatwa was issued against him. Wherever he is spotted, he has to be then killed. Then he's not going back to Iran, of course. But if the regime changes, then if the regime changes in a way that it would absorb him, then he can go back. But at the moment, he's running away from persecution in his own home country. That's how it works. All right? So well-founded fear of being persecuted is the most important element of becoming an asylum seeker or a refugee. They're facing discrimination, and you know the basis of discrimination, the features that you bring by birth, plus your political orientation. The state is unwilling to protect you, or the state is unable to protect you. Then you leave the country. Now, the difference in between refugee and asylum seeker, we have said that, I guess I had it among my papers. Asylum seeker has left the country because of the reasons we have mentioned, but they did not find a final destination yet. Refugee has found a final destination. Refugee is settled. Found a final destination. Refugeeship is a legal status. So it is something like a citizenship, but with limited rights. Any questions until here? Do you know the difference in between migrant, asylum seeker, and refugee at the moment? Yes, dear.
According to the foreigners and international protection law, we are not allowed to send the...
I'm coming to that. Good point. Non-refoulement.
Okay, okay, you can now ask later.
Okay. Let's talk about those rights then. The rights of the refugees. Refugees have 4 core rights. They're quite central to their being. The first one is what your friend has just mentioned, the right, the non-refoulement. The second one is right to identity, freedom of movement, and right to family. Those 4 rights are the most important, most principal rights. What is non-refoulement right? Principle of non-refoulement. Have you ever heard of that? Well, principle of non-refoulement says that when an asylum seeker arrives in your country, then you can decide to keep this person, or you can decide to send this person to a third country. But if the person is running away from persecution, then the person is never forcibly returned to their home countries. So the person is never given back. If the person is given back, then the person is going to be tortured, murdered, rights are going to be violated. Principle of non-refoulement is protecting asylum seekers from being forcibly returned to their home countries. If they're saying that they're going to be killed, if you give the Syrians back to their own countries, well, bombs are raining, so it's going to be the bombs of whichever country or some terrorist organizations, a Free Syrian Army, whatever, they're going to be killed. They are unable to protect themselves. So whatever you do with them, either you keep them in Turkey or you open the gates and send them to Greece and Italy or whatever, but you never give those people back to Syria. Our example with the homosexual person coming from Iran. You can keep the person, you can let the person look for refuge in Canada, whatever, but you never return the person back to Iran. The female run away from Ethiopia. The person can be kept, the person can be turned to third countries, the person is never given back to Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, whatever, once again, because she's going to face persecution. Okay? So this is the principle of non-refoulement. And this principle is based on diverse papers, numerous papers. It is protecting individuals from torture. It is protecting individuals from slavery. It's protecting people from their human rights being violated. It is protecting people from being subject to discrimination. Therefore, this principle is based on diverse principles and papers. There are exceptions to principle of non-refoulement. Criminals are returned, of course. Our example was when a murderer runs away from Iran because the murderer is going to face 20 years of imprisonment in Iran. This is a criminal. The person is not running away from persecution. The person is running away from being punished by the reigning state, and the person is criminal. So this person is given back. This person is not under the protection of non-refoulement principle. This is the limit. Or you're just looking for better economic conditions, therefore you run away from your country through illegal ways, you enter to Greece. Then Greece authorities ask you, from which kind of persecution are you running around? Well, I'm just looking for a new job. Probably you're going to be returned. Not probably, you're going to be returned. So if you have no grounds to become an asylum seeker, then there is no principle of non-refoulement working for you. Or if you're a criminal, then non-refoulement principle is not working on you. What is the second important right of refugees?
Identity.
Identity. Why is that important? Do you have your identity cards?
Yes.
Of course, you're legal people right here. And do you carry them with you? Please, my goodness, check it out. You have to carry it. Why is that so important, having your identity card with you?
It's illegal in Turkey without. You have to carry your ID card
Yes.
all the time.
Anytime the police can stop you and ask for your identity card, and then you cannot be like, I don't have it. Then who are you?
Is it really implemented?
It is implemented. I mean,
My friend didn't have, and the police didn't mind.
my friend didn't have, and she ended up in a police station calling us. Yes.
It
So,
depends, probably.
Perhaps, but I mean, if you're entering to subways in Kızılay, then you always come across with some policemen. Of course, stopping. Most of males are stopped somehow,
but
young
sometimes
males.
there's a significant stereotype. They stop. For example, if you have a big backpack, when I sometimes take the subway and I have a huge backpack, and they always stop me and say, "What do you have in your backpack?"
And do they search it?
Yeah, sometimes. And I open it, I show them the books. They say, "Okay, good luck."
Okay, and do they ever ask for your identity card?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
They show, and then they ask what's in your backpack.
Once I've noticed that they were only stopping those people with some hats. Probably they have received some application related to one guy with wearing a hat. Therefore, they were stopping. I have seen someone raising their hands. Was that you, Sinan? Or Mohammed? Yes.
Can we use like e-devlet instead of our identity?
Try it and then tell me if it works.
Because they also want your number. At least giving your number is better than giving nothing.
I don't know how that GBT works.
Like what? The reason why they ask for ID card is because they can enter it.
The number.
Maybe you can make up the number. That's why.
But they check, and if the picture doesn't match, they can.
Well, the thing is that you must have your identity, and that with that card you can enroll to your university. You can enroll to exams that you're taking nowadays quite often, right? And this is how you can rent an apartment. This is how you can start a bank account. This is how you can have a SIM card to get in touch with your family members. So having an identity card is quite important, because with an identity, you can start your social, civil, and economic life. This is how you can start a business. This is how you are eligible. So identity is everything, right? And therefore, refugees have right for an identity. Without an identity, can you travel? Can you buy a plane ticket? Can you buy a bus ticket, actually? Okay, no, you cannot. This is how it should be. So you cannot travel without your identity card. You cannot start a bank account. This is the importance of an identity. Can you get married without an identity? No, you cannot. So if you want to have a family life, first you're supposed to have an identity card. So I guess I don't need to explain why identity is important for refugees. They need to travel, they need to find a job, they need to enroll their kids or themselves by schools or universities. They need an apartment, they need a shelter, and how can they rent? Would you rent your home if the person doesn't have an identity card? You don't know who they are, but they swear that they're going to pay the rent. Would you do that? They don't have a bank account, but they say that, wallahi billahi, I'm going to pay it. Would you then? So this is the importance of having an identity. What was the third right? Freedom of movement. When the refugees are given their status, it is not like that, okay, you become a refugee, but you're only going to remain in Toronto and you cannot move anywhere. But the person is going to get educated, perhaps. They find a university in another city, or they're going to start a business, or they're going to get married, whatever. So freedom of movement is quite important, and it is not just like movement within Canada. When they have their identity, it's something like a passport, and when they can make proper applications, visa applications, they can also travel in between countries if the visa is issued. So they can have some relatives living in Los Angeles, and they have some space in their home for their visitor. So they give guarantee papers to the refugee in Canada, and the refugee in Canada buys their plane tickets as well, and with the entire papers, they make their visa application. Then United States would let them to visit their family members in Los Angeles for 2 weeks, for instance. This is possible, so this is how it works. Let's start here.
As I know, there are some countries tax criminals without even their prosecution threats. How they call those people?
Who does that?
For instance,
Don't give me the example of Mexico. That's a different story.
For instance, yes.
Uh-huh.
I know there are some countries, they do not give Turkish terrorists to Turkish
At that point, this story is different actually with the terrorists, criminals. For instance, there are many soldiers that have run to Greece after FETÖ incident on 15th of July, and they have to be given back to Turkey because they are criminals. But Greece is not giving them back. You know why? Because those soldiers have submitted evidence that some people were killed on the bridge as soldiers. If they ever come back to Turkey, they're going to face lynch. They're going to be killed. Because they have evidence for that, Greece says that, okay, we have to be in line with non-refoulement. This is the explanation. You have a question, then I'll come to you. Yes?
I think it's before the freedom of movement in some situation. For example, some foreign move Turkey and freedom of movement.
They were not refugees. They were asylum seekers and they were settled into camps. They were supposed to remain in the camp. Those are rights for refugees. They were not refugees.
Like there were people in Switzerland and they were at the embassy and it was always we couldn't have seen them, their relation with PKK, and they were missing in Turkey, but at the same time they were spreading paper about PKK in Switzerland. But the country is still protecting them against Turkey. But
that's quite complicated. Once again, it has happened. In the very beginning, many European countries have said that they would issue refugeeship status to all Kurdish people because they are under persecution of Turkish state. And then people from Africa started to pour into Italy saying that we're Kurdish and we have faced torture under Turkish state. And many Turkish citizens, they're not even Kurdish, they have first traveled to Germany, for instance, by plane, with their passports. After they have landed in Germany, they have burnt their passports. And they said that they're Kurdish people coming from southeastern Turkey and they are tortured by the Turkish state and they're in Germany looking for refuge. So this is something badly exploited. We have said that human rights are for everybody, including terrorists as well. And if they're not facing any kind of fair trial, of course, then they can look for refugee countries saying that we cannot find fair hearings in Turkey. But what you're talking about is a badly abused situation that European states were providing refuge for certain groups. And, well, this was misused then. This is out of control, okay? This is how it has happened. And many different people have entered to European countries and they've said that if they ever go back, then they're going to be tortured.
And their behavior was kind of I don't know, absurd. They were at the embassy and they want to do something.
In Turkish embassy, you mean?
Yeah, in Turkey, general, general.
And they're not refugees then, they still have Turkish passports.
No, they don't have, but they want to do something. I don't remember, they're
marrying with Turkish guys.
And I don't know. And we asked for a document to proceed their business, and they said no, we don't have it. And they start to shout Turkey cannot do anything else. The Switzerland is behind us, and they even swear.
You know what? I cannot bring in comments on that because I don't understand why they were in the embassy. Either they have the passport of Turkish state, or if this is not the case, I mean, if they have Turkish passport, if they have it, they don't have it. Then they're refugees. And if they're refugees, then I don't understand why they were in the embassy. Perhaps looking for their family members or starting business.
And we asked them, how did you arrive Switzerland, by plane or something? They said, no, our eyes were blinded and we were in track. We don't know how.
They don't want to share information how they have arrived. I really don't know because this is a very complicated case and I don't understand the relationship in between person and the consulate. If they're refugees, then they have no business with the consulate. I don't know. I really don't know. How about the last right to family? Yes.
once you're a refugee, I guess you're entitled to bring your family from your home country as well.
That's true. That's known as family reunification. For most of the time, it is young males that start this entire migration, asylum seeking and finding refuge story. And once they are settled in a third country, then they ask the country, destination country, to bring their families with. The question is, who is a family? Are your parents part of your family? How about your spouse, kids, siblings, cousins? It depends. If you find refuge in Africa, sorry for that, but that's it. The largest family definition is found in Africa. So if you find refuge in Africa, then probably that country accepts your parents, grandparents, and siblings, and yes, entire clan as your family. But if you're going to Western states, they have more limited understanding of a family, that your spouse and kids are your family. So it depends. And it depends on your age, and if you're so young, then your parents are your family, and if you're middle-aged, then your spouse and your kids, and so on. It depends, okay? And that's a domestic process. The thing is that refugees have right to family. You know, there are many kids arriving to destination countries. They don't have their families with them. Either they died on their way, or they have sent the kid with some other people. So after the kid arrives, then the family members can be brought next to them. And young males do it a lot. First they arrive, and then they call for their wife and their children. This is how it works. This is known as family reunification. Now we'll talk about how the person receives that refugee ship. That's a long process. Once the family member becomes a refugee, then the other family members do not necessitate to go through the entire same procedure. How it happens is that one person becomes a refugee, and instead of you making a new refugee ship application, you only start a family reunification case. So the process is different. Now, let's talk about that entire process. Who becomes a refugee and how? There are two ways of becoming a refugee. You see that some people, we have recently seen that Syrian case. Syrian people were trying to first enter to Turkey, then travel through the Turkey, then arriving Greece. Through Greece, they were trying to get to Italy, and their main aim was arriving to Austria or Germany or France. So either the refugee or asylum seeker tries to reach the destination country and then make applications by that country's authorities. This is the first thing. The second thing is that they come to Turkey and they make an application by UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And then the UNHCR, a sub-body of UN, starts an application, a procedure for them, and finds a third country for them. UNHCR is a sub-body of United Nations. It is a completely non-political organization. It is a humanitarian organization. It is there for the protection of asylum seekers and refugees, plus Haymatlos people, those people they don't have any identity anymore, stateless people. They also take care of internally displaced people. So sometimes people become refugees within their own countries because they cannot go back to their own cities and so on. They also take care of returnees. So this is what they do. This is an intergovernmental organization. All intergovernmental organizations, they're working with the governments. Therefore, they need a bureau in the capital city. So they have an office in Ankara, for instance, as capital city. But we have said that their main work deals with refugees or asylum seekers. So asylum seekers do not mushroom suddenly in Ankara. They always appear in the border areas, border cities. Therefore, UNHCR has also field offices around the borders to welcome the refugees. Now, I mean, you're educated people. You can speak foreign languages. You have passports. You have money to buy a plane ticket. So if anything goes wrong in your country, probably you'll find a plane ticket, first land in a country, and then talk to the authorities of that country saying that I don't want to go back. I cannot go back because of this, that situation. You can express yourself. You have money to survive in that country for a while, or you're educated. You can find a job. What we're talking about mostly is not such a case. What we're talking about is those people that do not speak any other language. They don't have a passport. They're not knowledgeable about their rights. They're walking through the borders. What they can carry is a couple of clothes and their kids, and they have no protection for themselves. They enter to Turkey through the Syrian border. They don't speak Turkish. They don't speak English, and they have to be eligible to tell about what they're running away. And they have to show their papers. For most of them, they don't have their papers. What I mean is identity cards and so on. They don't have much money with them. What UNHCR does, they are not knowledgeable about UNHCR. Even most of educated people are not quite knowledgeable about UNHCR. So how can those people? And now we're going to talk about the process that happens within UNHCR. And then you should assess how successful UNHCR can be under influx situations. Formally, it was 20 years ago that I have conducted an internship by UNHCR, and daily 20-25 people were coming, and all people working in UNHCR were exhausted because so many people are coming. 20-25 we're talking about, okay? And what happens is that, well, first of all, those people have to be interviewed. First of all, they have to give their papers in, and they don't have even their identity cards or passports with them. They only share their names, and they only tell which country they're coming from. And then they say that they're looking for asylum. What happens under UNHCR is that they open a folder for them. A case is opened. And then the person must be interviewed. And the person speaks either Kurdish, and the question is which Kurdish, you know? Is it Kurmanchi, is it Zaza, what kind of? The person speaking Arabic, or the person is coming from Afghanistan, then they're speaking which language? Dari or Pashtun, that's true. Or they're coming from Iran. So they're coming from Pakistan, they need Urdu. So what we need is, first of all, a translator for the entire translation. An interview is held with the person in their native language. And then it is translated into the working language. And then the entire folder is submitted to the lawyers, the legal clerks of UNHCR. They start reading through the interviews. Sometimes they have extra questions. Sometimes they need extra evidence. The person says that the person was beaten badly in the police station. And sometimes they have photos and medical reports with them showing that they were tortured. But sometimes they don't have any marks on their bodies. They have no evidence. So lawyers start to ask for evidence. Can you find anything? Can you ask your relatives living in your country, sending you something? So you see how lofty that situation is. And that process proceeds and proceeds. And sometimes if there is not enough evidence for them, then the case is closed and the person cannot become a refugee. The person has right for appeals again, for twice or the third times, I'm not quite sure about that. So the same case is opened once again with new evidences, then new interviews are held, and then translation takes place, and then legal clerks go through them. And if the person is eligible, then UNHCR said that, okay, now you're in Turkey and you can become a refugee, but not in Turkey. As you know, Turkey does not accept refugees. Then what happens? A third country settlement is necessary. A third country is found. And that finding third country is not like a travel bureau working with passengers. Where would you like to go? In which city would you prefer? No, of course not. For instance, person is coming from Iran and the person's faith is Baha'i. Most of the Baha'is are sent to Canada. So the person's relatives are found. In which country are they and for what reason are you running away from? Perhaps the person can speak German, for instance. Then starting a life in Germany would be easier. Or the person is Baha'i, all Baha'is are living there, so it is easier. So UNHCR decides which country the asylum seeker is going to be sent to, and this is how third country settlement is done. Believe me, I have just shortened the entire process. It is even longer for each and every person. Can you imagine how UNHCR works under influx situations? How many applications can be done? How many registries can be done? How many interviews can be done? How legal clerks can work on each and every issue, case, one by one. How possible that is. So this is how UNHCR is turning asylum seekers to third country settlement. This is work done in Turkey. My example was Turkey. Turkey does not accept any refugees. Therefore, they send. We have said that there are two ways of becoming refugees. Either an application is done through UNHCR and UNHCR is referring asylum seekers to third states. This is known as mandate refugeeship. There are also convention refugees. Convention refugees try to reach their destination country on their own, like arriving to Austria, arriving to Germany, arriving to France. And then they make their applications directly by German authorities, Austrian authorities, or French authorities. And they assess if they're going to be given that status or not. So there are two ways to become refugees. And as I see, you are already inside that. Are you still surviving? Yes, please.
For instance, in the case of mandate refugees, can Germany refuse?
It is not a surprise for Germany that someone is coming. UNHCR is always in touch with their counterparts. And if UNHCR is considering sending someone to Germany, they get in touch with German authorities and check certain facts for that person's future. Because if that refugeeship status is given, it is just like being given an identity, a new citizenship. So most of the refugees enjoy many rights, but for instance, right to be elected or right to vote sometimes. But they have many rights, just like a regular citizen. And in time, sometimes in some countries, after working for a certain period of time and after paying a certain amount of tax or certain time limit, then they can even become citizens of that country. So it depends, but that's the legal status. Could you follow everything? Do you have any questions? Are you leaving? I was preparing to keep you actually a little bit longer. Do you have any questions?
Yes. For example, I'm a student seeker and I arrived somewhere, but I'm not sure that it's my final destination or not. Then I commit a crime.
Okay.
So, since I'm not a refugee, I don't have a political status or legal status.
You shouldn't become a criminal.
Yeah, I know, but what am I gonna be see court in my country or?
Depends. It needs to be more concrete for an answer. What you're running away from? What kind of crime did you commit there? Okay, you were hungry, you have stolen something, it's something else, and you were having some fun in a bar late night and you have abused a woman, that's something else. Yes?
Out of curiosity, 2 years ago when Syrians were running away easily to Europe, Albania didn't accept them and built electric fences. According to Albanian law, were Syrians refugees or asylum seekers? Or
I'm not knowledgeable about Albanian laws actually, how they are. I am also not...
people and send them away because Bulgaristan didn't want people to come.
Okay.
They closed the way. I was shocked and I wanted to
Well, actually, in the recent years, what has happened in between Turkey and Europe, many illegal things have unfortunately taken place as well. Because people have, not the people, sorry, states have obligations and states have certain duties to fulfill, and they will run away from their duties. And as we were studying law of treaties, do you remember we have studied the Europe-Turkey deal? What was the problem with that deal?
It was not a treaty.
It's not a treaty, for instance. That was just a press release. So, as I told you, I have given you just the basics of refugee law, not the details, but actually if we start studying what's happening nowadays, then what you need is more than what I have provided you. You need to study the constitutions and refugee laws of diverse states as well. Do you want to study what we have just mentioned for 5 minutes before we start with the quiz? Yes. Then take a look at your notes for a while. I mean, if you don't want to study, I can immediately ask my question as well. You better study. I'll let you for 5 minutes.
Hocam, this is the last chapter, right?
This is the last chapter.